Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I hope you're all well. Our subject for this evening is relationships surviving and thriving after lockdown. And I'm delighted to welcome our guest this evening, Mrs. Tova Hersh. Tova, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Now, Tova, just a few words of introduction. Tova Hersh is a qualified person-centered psychodynamic counselor. She has been a volunteer counselor at the Jewish Marriage Council, the JMC, for over 20 years. She's recently taken on the role of acting clinical director to ensure the future of the JMC continues. Alongside her work at the JMC, she's been an active member of the Jewish Children's Holiday Fund. She's a color tutor for the United Synagogue Marriage Enhancement Program, as well as a PAL tutor. Now, Tova, I hope you don't mind also mentioning your connection to Bournemouth and Elstree Shul, is that Tova's daughter and son-in-law used to live in Boreham Woods, and we're still very close with them as well. Now, Tova has very kindly agreed to take questions from our participants, so please use the chat facility here on Zoom to post your questions, or at the end to put up your hand and say it in the end. I'm delighted to again want to say welcome, Tova, and thank you so much for giving of your time for us this evening. So Tova, I'll begin with perhaps the first question. Makes sense. Firstly, how are you and how have your family been managing during lockdown? You had a grandson, right?
Yes, I had a new grandson and I had a new granddaughter as well. So
Mazel tov.
Interesting times when you can't be available to your family when you want to be, and you manage. Thankfully, we have Zoom and we have FaceTime, so we are privileged that there are still ways of communicating, even though we cannot be together physically.
Right. Difficult though.
Difficult because you have to keep your distance. Certainly now that we've had a few of the restrictions lifted, you can go in the garden and see your grandchildren, but of course you can't have contact with them. And that's always hard with children because they see things have changed and assume things are back to normal.
Right.
So it is hard that you can't do all the things you'd like to do.
Right. Well, I wish you must done muzzle again, and when the time is when it's okay to, I'm sure that first hug will be very, very special.
It will indeed.
For you as well. So moving on, can I ask you tell us a little bit about the work that you do for the JMC, the Jewish Marriage Council, and also that organisation that you work for?
Okay, so with the JMC has been in existence since 1946. It was the brainchild of the late Lord Jakobovits and his wife, Lady Jakobovits, and they decided that it was important that couples had a space where they could go when they needed to discuss issues that they were having, which they couldn't resolve on their own. And it just grew from there. We didn't just do couples, we also do individuals, and we also offer family therapy. And all of these options take place in a building in Hendon. It's quite a secluded building. People don't actually know where we are because we're not so visible. And we have a number of counsellors that give their time on a voluntary basis and work for the JMC as often as they can. Now, my role there at the moment is acting clinical director. So I am responsible for being a bit of the gatekeeper of the type of people that come into the agency, making sure that we can help them. It's not so much whether they're right for us, but whether we have the tools to be able to help them. And I would be doing the assessments and then placing them with the counsellors. So we have a team of counsellors and we have supervisors. We're all fully qualified, and we manage the number of clients that come through. We've been able to do even more because of Zoom. It means that we have more time available, and thankfully people are not waiting too long on our waiting list.
Right. The JMC is, am I right, is a charity?
It is a charity, which means that
funding?
Sorry?
Do you receive any statutory funding?
No, we don't. We rely basically on donations, but we've got some regular donors who are really fantastic. We do very little advertising, but that's because we are on a budget. So we try to do it through word of mouth. But it doesn't mean that we don't get people. People have heard of the JMC or they knew about it years ago. And we just want to encourage people to recognise there is somewhere that you can go, that it is available to everybody. We do a sliding scale so that anybody that hasn't got the funds will not be turned away.
Okay. Now let's putting on the pandemic on one side for a moment. We will come back to that, of course. That'll be a lot of our focus this evening. But in your opinion, what are the main challenges that face marriage in the 21st century?
Well, the main challenges are juggling everything that life throws at us. We're constantly juggling work, family life, trying to have a life outside of the family as well. And all of these things can be done if you negotiate it properly with your spouse or your partner. It's important to make sure that you both take from the relationship as much as you're putting in. So that means if you invest 100% into the relationship, you're able to take 100% from it. But it has to be equal in that both parties are giving. And in today's age where you've got many people where both parties are working and they might have children as well, there's a tremendous pressure to be able to do every job to the best of our ability. And sometimes we can't always do that. And it's okay to be able to say that I'm not so good in this area and I might need some help. It's important that we recognize where our strengths are and where our weaknesses are and try to balance that with our spouse or our partner. So the biggest stress or the biggest problem today would be communication. We are so used to now communicating without words. We look at our phones, we type a message, we might speak a message so that it records a message, but it's not the same as actually speaking face to face with somebody and really expressing how you're feeling, how you want to be helped by that person. That's the biggest challenge today, is people are very wary of saying, I need help in this area, or I feel anxious, or I feel a bit fearful. We should be able to use these words and not feel ashamed. And that's, I would say that's the biggest thing that people need to overcome, that there is no harm in admitting that sometimes we're not perfect in every area.
Right. Well, that's very interesting. Thank you. You mentioned obviously technology, how that has an impact on relationships. In your 20 years experience, have you noticed a difference or a change in the challenges now as they were in the past?
Well, I think a lot of people that use our services do have a problem with communication because everything is instant today. Therefore, trying to invest in a relationship and giving time to it by maybe sitting down and having a conversation, it doesn't happen anymore because life is at a very fast pace. People are rushing to do so many things, and yes, we can be more productive, but where are we actually putting all our energy? Are we putting it into the things that matter most? And relationships would be the most important aspect to anybody's life, and that's where we have to invest. It's no point investing in mobile apps on your phone and spending however many hours catching up with things on your phone, because that's not real life.
Right. That's very interesting. Thank you. Now, as I was mentioned, obviously, main focus at the moment, in the last few months, we've been in lockdown, although things are slowly starting to ease. Have you seen particular stresses from that, and what sort of challenges and demands are there being on couples in lockdown?
Well, the biggest struggle is, first of all, managing everybody under the same roof for 24 hours a day and having to work and run the home and see to the children, get their homework or schoolwork done, ensure that they're doing their lessons. It's endless, and it can be quite exhausting for most people. And the most important thing is to remember that we can manage everything if we structure our day and pace ourselves and allow ourselves time to take a breather. It shouldn't be that we're on this constant roller coaster. Now, a lot of people probably have noticed that maybe life has got a bit calmer because we've been restricted in what we can do. And that's what we want to maintain. We want to maintain this calm persona so that we can then show and achieve more by being calmer. And being calm means that we then might not lose our temper so much. We might have more control over aspects of ourselves that we're not very keen on. So yes, I would say that this period in time has given us something very precious. It's given us time to reflect, time to really look at what is important, and to maybe get rid of things that we were doing before that actually don't matter so much.
Right. Now, we're talking about those of the internal stresses on a relationship because of COVID. Have you noticed people being affected by the external stresses? People are unsure about their jobs when they go back after lockdown, or other situations like that, the external pressures of schools being closed. Have you noticed that having an impact on people's relationships?
Anything that can be a stress factor will have an impact on the relationship. There is so much uncertainty at the moment that even anybody that's normally a very controlled person would probably pick up uncertainty that's out there. Nobody really knows what's going to happen in the future. How safe is it? And yes, this adds to people who already have anxiety, who already show symptoms of having maybe a mental health problem. This is going to exacerbate that even more. And it's how one learns to manage this and to try and put things into perspective where they can keep themselves calm and more relaxed. And that's usually by doing something like yoga or meditation or getting in touch with nature. All of these things can help a person to just find their equilibrium again. It's really important that if we recognize that we're stressed, that we put things in place so that we can de-stress. And that can be done very simply. You can just remove yourself from the stressful event and take some time out, or you can do something that you enjoy, that you know has a positive effect on you. That's also a good way of distressing. So it's important to keep check of oneself. When you're irritable, recognize what is this telling me? Am I hungry? Do I need to take some time out? Do I need to just close my eyes and get a cat nap just to refresh myself? Try and listen to your body. And that way you will not be projecting any of your own fears, your own problems that you're experiencing onto somebody else.
Do you think we're good at doing that, being able to recognize when we're stressed and what's causing that stress?
No, it's not something that we actively recognize. It's something we have to just pay attention to ourselves. It's like when we're getting angry, and we know we're getting angry, we have the ability to take ourselves away from that situation and calm down, or we choose to go in with a fight and we go in and argue. We have the choice. It's whether we want to make the right choice at the time.
That's very good advice. I mean, I always remember the words of Stephen Covey, who talks about the idea about being response able, that we are able to choose the response to any given situation. We can't control the situation, but we can choose. The only things within our control is how we respond to it. Is that something you'd also advocate?
I think that's quite a good way of looking at it, that we have a choice over everything in terms of, I can choose to be happy, I can choose to be sad, I can choose to be a worrier to some extent, or I can choose to be positive. Now, you can be a worrier and be positive. There's no harm in worrying. It's when worrying becomes more important than being positive. So telling yourself that everything is going to be okay, talking to yourself is a very good way of actually giving yourself reassurance. So if you're worrying about something and it's something that you can't actually control, then you might want to think about it in a different ways. What does my worry achieve? The worry makes me a wreck. It makes me incapable of doing anything. So it actually paralyzes a person. And is that what you want for yourself? So you need to actually think about things that are hindering you. How can I look at them in a different way and alter what I do with it so that I can actually overcome it?
That's very interesting. Thank you. Now, we've talked about obviously the effects of lockdown, that obviously slow down in pace and people are at home more. And obviously that's turned our houses into multiple different things. So for some people it's their office, some people it's their schoolroom, some people it's their home, some people it's all of those things and even more. Now, how do we go about managing the boundaries between those different aspects of our lives that have now been all sort of squished together?
It's a big challenge, especially if you don't have space. It's really important to create each working environment. So if it is time for school, make it look a little bit like a school. Move things around. Put the books out that the children are going to need. Make it look like a classroom, and then convert it back to the office or to the living area. It might be good to move pictures around sometimes. It's could be quite fun if you allow yourself the time to actually think about how you want to do it, but it must be with clear boundaries. That means maybe a structured time is, this is the time for school, this is the time for maybe one party's Zoom meeting. Everything has to work around a schedule, but bear in mind that you do need to give yourself a clue as to where are you? Are you in the classroom or are you in your office? Because that helps you make that transition.
Right.
And it's also good to even think about the clothing you wear, that people are used to not possibly getting dressed now because they're not seeing anybody and they're not going out. But it's really important that you take time to think about what you're wearing, because that puts you in the headspace for whatever you're going to be doing. So let's say office. Put on your office clothes. Why should you be in your dressing gown or just in your tracksuit? Make yourself feel that you're in a working area and a working mode. You'll be far more productive than just slouching around in what you normally do for casual wear.
Right.
And again, I think you have to work together as a family and get everybody's involvement, because if everybody feels that they are part of the new structure, everybody will work together.
Right. I'm just going to pause there for a second just to remind people that while we're talking, please use the chat facility in Zoom to ask any questions you like that I'll put to Tova at the end. Oh,
sorry.
I thought you disappeared there.
Sorry, I can only see myself at the moment, so now I'm seeing everybody because I
see. Fine, okay, fine. Just the spotlight is on you, but don't worry too much. It's a bit off-putting, I know. We'll have to get used to this still. We're still getting used to this. Actually, carry on from that. Really, I think it's talking about this importance of boundaries at home and setting these structures, because I've been reading that some of the large corporations and companies have been saying that they're actually reassessing whether they need these large offices in the center of towns. And we've seen how people can actually now work from home, and and it is possible that it's not necessary to people to commute. So is this something you think we're going to have to get used to and find a new way of adapting to life where we're at home more and on top of each other more?
Well, I think that this whole lockdown has given us the beauty of actually looking at how we use our time. If we can work from home and we have no reason to go into the office, why would we want to waste valuable time traveling to get there and risking being in the company of people if you're traveling on the underground or on a bus? So yes, in some ways, it might make people think about working more from home. People have certainly worked far harder at home because they're not taking the normal breaks. They haven't got the chit chat with other people in the office. Therefore, they are more productive, and it might be we can actually cut down our working hours.
Right.
And that will give more time to be with your family.
Right. I have also read about this, that the only part people are missing possibly are the social aspects of it, the water cooler moments. That's, as you said, that sort of the socializing bit. But that you can generate that yourself possibly as well, and build that into
Well,
your day.
but you can take your break. You can do a Zoom with somebody, and it's just as good as being in the same room as them.
Right.
Because we have the beauty of being able to see each other, and we can share whatever we need to share with each other. Therefore, is there a need? I think the question is there a need to change the new norm?
Right.
Because the norm now is to be at home. You can run, the fathers can run their kids to school and get back in time to have a meeting or to get on with their work. So it's given the family dynamic a lot more to work with, because it's the onus is not then on one parent.
Right. Now, I think you probably read as more than most about the effects of lockdown, but there have been as many articles about the effects of lockdown having improved relationships as there have been that put pressure on the relationships. Now, in your opinion, to what extent do you believe that the male-female stereotypes are contributing towards the strain and potential conflict that's occurring between couples?
We've all got a stereotype of what our expectation is of marriage, in terms of where is the division of labor? How do we divide that? Is it that one party works, one party stays at home? Today, we can't think like that. Today, we have both parties working. Therefore, we have to divide everything equally so that neither one starts to get resentful. If we don't do that, there's resentment comes in through the back door, and we don't recognize why we're resentful. We just know it's there, and it can come out at any moment in an argument. The resentment is there, but it may have no relevance to the current discussion or argument that you're having. So it's really important to just bear in mind that we need to negotiate and we need to compromise. Those are two very important words that every relationship requires. We shouldn't take things for granted. That's the danger, is when we take for granted that the same person is going to be taking the rubbish out, because they've always taken the rubbish out. Well, why can't it be alternated? Or why can't sometimes it be a surprise? Oh, I'm going to do it for once. The element of surprise in any relationship is the best way of actually enhancing a relationship.
Right, and that probably you find that interesting symbiosis between your work at the JMC and your role as a colour teacher as well. Presumably, preparing couples for marriage is probably the best way of ensuring that they have successful relationships.
Well, I'm only dealing with one part, so I'm only dealing with the female. Right. So I can only give the advice to the female.
Right.
And it's very difficult because you don't actually know whether her partner is getting as equally good advice, and whether there'll be conflict because they might be told something completely different.
Interesting.
So
right.
It's always good. Sometimes it's always good to know who's teaching the other half.
Right. Well, as a Hossen teacher, I have to take that on board and make sure that we're aligned in that. You know, as we talked about the different roles and relationships and the different and the new roles that people are having to take on now because of lockdown, you know, the question here is how can couples change gear with one another, moving from business partner, homemaker, parent to perhaps a more intimate relationship?
It's really important to recognize that you're not just one thing. You're not just a wife, a husband, a mother, a father, a brother, a daughter. You are everything. But in a particular relationship, you have to make sure that you give and invest time into it. And that might mean actually making specific time where you can be together, because life is busy and everybody has a different schedule. But if a couple want to have a good relationship, it's important that they make time to do an activity together, or to even have what we call a date night. Date nights can be for anybody. It doesn't have to be for people that are single. And it can also be a surprise. It doesn't have to be pre-planned. Spending time and actually learning about the other is really important, and something we forget to do. Once we get married, we get possibly caught up in everything else that we forget that we are also an individual in the partnership. So we might have things we want to do for ourselves, and we might have things that we want to do with the other. And we have to be mindful of that and respectful of that too. But all of that comes into the negotiation and the compromise. These are things that you will talk about. Hopefully you'll talk about them, and you will understand each other better by allowing each other to do the things individually and then do things together.
Right. And how would you say that couples could actually use this time that they've got now to build their relationship?
It's really important to make sure you always communicate. If you can communicate and say, even when you're not feeling great, you actually admit and take ownership. I don't feel great. You don't want it to go on just lost ears. When somebody says that to you, that's a beautiful way in for you to say, would you like to talk about it? Can I help you? How can I support you? It's no good just hearing somebody. Sometimes we need to take the cue and act on it. And this is where one of the things we teach couples is about active listening. We all think we can really listen well, but really listening well is when you hear somebody and you can actually feedback what they've said to you without adding anything to it. You actually say, if I've heard you correctly, this is what you've said. That is active listening. So we're not looking to find a response. We're just looking to listen and really understand, what is this person communicating to me? And that's one of the very first things we do with anybody that comes into the Jewish Marriage Council, because good communication means you have to also be a good listener.
Right. Do you think we're good at that? I'm not saying men here or women, I'm saying in general.
No, I think in general, we're too concerned to come back with an answer, a response. So while somebody is talking, we're already formulating a response. We're not really hearing what they're saying. Right. So that's the important aspect, is to really hear what's being said and think about, okay, how can I help you with this? What do I need to do in order to help you work through this? Sometimes the person might not want anything. They might just want you to just hear. So it's always good to check, what can I do? How can I help? How can I support?
I was seeing some wry smiles there as we were talking. So it was obviously, this is resonating with some people there. Do you think, this might be an unfair question, but do you think that Jewish people are particularly good at talking or listening, or one or the other?
I don't think you can actually narrow it down to Jewish people being one or the other, because everybody's different and everybody's experience of life is different. So therefore, if you're an anxious person, for instance, it might be really difficult for you to hear somebody else tell you that they're struggling with something, because you might be just too immersed in your own stuff. So I wouldn't just say it's got anything to do with religion. I think it's more about the fact, knowing the person and knowing yourself. If you know yourself, if you know the type of person you are, you can then actually say, look, I'm one of these people that looks okay on the outside, but on the inside, that's something completely different. And there's many people that experience this, where you will never know what's going on inside, because they're very good at camouflage. Now, if you know that this, let's just say your partner is that sort of person, if you know that about them, then you have to find that way in to get them to open up to you. And it might be, you might say, you know, I notice when you're stressed, you do X, Y, and Z. So you actually are saying to them that they may not recognize something in themselves, but you can see the cue. You've picked up on something. So when we do counseling, body language is really important, because it gives us an indication as to what the person might be feeling. And they may be too vulnerable to actually share it. So we might be able to put it into words for them.
Right. That's really interesting. Thank you. Now, again, a bit of advice from you. How do we ensure that we have the energy that we need for both our spouses as well as our families during this time?
Energy is probably the biggest thing that we've all needed at this moment in time, because there's the tasks are endless. For even though we're in lockdown, there's still so much that we can do, and we are doing. It is always important to make sure you eat properly, not just a quick bite and running out. Actually sit down and eat properly. Make sure you take exercise. Make sure you get enough sleep. Those three components will be enough for anybody to manage whatever comes their way. Now, some people might say, how can I sleep? I've got a young baby. It's impossible. It is hard when you have a young baby and you're on, your gas tank is running low. But it's important then to utilize what you have. So if you're at home and you've got an older child, you might want to use your older child to help take the baby for a little bit, or you might have your husband working from home and maybe you can sort of organize things so that he can help. There's ways of doing it if you just look around and think about, what can I do to make things easier for me? You might want to put the baby, I'm using the baby as an example, but you know, there are some families that may not have young children, but it's just thinking about, okay, what can I do to occupy whatever is getting in the way of me taking time out for myself. Me time is very important. We might say, I'm so busy, I never had time to do whatever. That whatever might make all the difference to you. So make time for yourself, even if it means cutting something that you do down by 15 minutes. Each activity that you do, cut it down by 15 minutes, you get an hour from 4 different activities. You can then plan and do something that you know is going to invigorate and give you that extra energy that allows you to then continue the rest of the day.
That's a great insight, taking me time. Do you think some people feel that's selfish, and then that's what stops them from doing that, and yet really it's something they really need, not for just themselves but for the rest of the family?
Well, people might think it's selfish and how can I do that? But then you have to think about, who is going to look after me? If I'm incapable of doing something, who will look after me? We are responsible to look after ourselves. And if it means that we might have to say, for the next 15 minutes, I'm engaged. That means I'm in a room somewhere, quietly, just recharging my batteries. Is that a terrible thing to do in the space of 24 hours, to take 15 minutes? And then we can even extend the 15 minutes. Why does it have to be 15 minutes? I think we need to recognize that our bodies are not fueled to just keep going. They need to be looked after. In the same way that we give a car an MOT, we have to also give our body an MOT. And that means making sure that we have the stamina. So we might need to do a little bit more exercise in order to give us the stamina. Make time for it. If you've got a garden, use it. Sit outside, get fresh air. If you don't have a garden, go to an open window. Make sure you've got enough fresh air coming in, because all of these elements help us to get the best from ourselves.
Thank you, Tova. That's so insightful. Thank you so much. We're going to come on to people's questions who've been sharing. So please continue to add your questions to the chat facility or raise your hand. I'm just going to put it on a different view so I can see everybody. Whoever wants to put their hand up. Well, I can't see anybody. A lot of people have got their screens closed. But if you've got a question, just put it into the chat facility or raise your hand if you want to come on screen. So I'm going to start with this question. And someone's asked, as a marriage and relationship counselor, would you have chosen for this thing called lockdown? Do you think it's been something beneficial or something negative for relationships?
I actually think it's been the best thing for relationships, because it's forced people to spend more time with each other and to learn how to get through this situation. Because this situation has brought a number of emotions out in people, and we have to learn how to manage it. And if you are managing it with the help of somebody else, that sets you up for anything that you're going to have to find, anything that challenges you. So if we think about the people that struggle with communication in lockdown, it's given you time to be able to work on it. Now, not every relationship is great, and sometimes it's difficult when you haven't got someone that you're able to really connect with. I always think it's important to think about what brought you together. How did you get together? What was it that drew you to that person? And use that as a way of developing the relationship. Take each other down memory lane. Do you remember when we used to do this? Or when we did that? How it felt? How we enjoyed it? And try and recapture things that were really good. Use those as a way of really enhancing your relationship, because we tend to forget. We forget what we used to enjoy or what we used to do. So going down memory lane is always a good way. And I think having lockdown, especially when you've got time to dig out old photographs. You've got time to look at maybe letters or videos that you've got of family events that you might never have had the time to look at. We've been given the beauty of really catching up with ourselves and getting in touch with the things that really matter. So I would say, from my perspective, lockdown has probably been the best thing for most of us. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that was probably going to say they disagree, but it's a new way of really learning how to be together again, especially if we've forgotten.
Right. That's fascinating. Thank you. I think it was the Chinese saying that the word for crisis is the same word for opportunity. So I think, that this has given us an opportunity, and as I said, also to use it. Now, someone's asked, I mentioned in my introduction to you that you're a psychodynamic counselor. Could you just explain a little bit what that actually means?
Yeah, so there's many forms of counselling. So I'll start with person-centered for the moment. Person-centered counselling is very much about getting the person to acknowledge their feelings, to express their feelings, to learn about themselves and develop through understanding their feelings. Psychodynamic is when we actually are looking at the unconscious and going back into the history of a person. So we're looking at where their beginnings were, what events may have occurred in their lifetime that would have had an impact on them later in life. So psychodynamic is very much, it's used in collaboration with other forms of therapy. So you have Gestalt, you've got some people that work in the here and now. There's many schools of thought, but it's a combination. Psychodynamic is another one that you incorporate in your work. So you're not just I'm not just working with somebody with feelings, I'm also looking at their history, their development, and also what's going on with their unconscious processes.
Thank you. So someone's asked here in the chat, I'm just going to read it from the chat. Can I ask, why do you not see couples together before the wedding? It's a long time ago now, but we went together before we got married, actually as a group, for 6 weeks in those days. But surely it's important that both people hear the same thing.
I quite agree. The Jewish Marriage Council used to do an engaged couples course. And it was a really successful course. It was broken down into 6 elements where couples learnt communication, negotiation, how to do with the Jewish home. And there was one where they had a rabbi come in and talk about things. It was quite a varied course, but people met other couples and stayed friends with these couples. And I meet people today who say to me, I did that course 30 odd years ago, and I'm still friendly with the people that were on the course with me. We did want to reintroduce it, and we attempted to reintroduce it. The problem is that the younger couples today are so busy, especially leading up to the wedding. they've got the plans for their wedding, they've got colour and hosen lessons. There's so much to be done to try and now fit in an engaged couples course before the wedding seems impossible. We would like to actually reintroduce it, but it depends on the public. It's the demand. We need the demand. And if there are young people out there today that are on Zoom today who are engaged, who feel that they would really benefit from having this course, by all means, we would put it on.
That's really good to know. So excellent, thank you. Now, have you noticed that couples are, well, it's documented that couples are marrying later in life than they're older than they were previously? Do you think that puts particular challenges and stresses on a relationship, or makes it easier?
Well, it's twofold, because the older you are, the more difficult it can be in terms of, if you want to have a family, there's a pressure on you to start a family immediately, and you might not really want to, or you might not know your partner well enough to go into the next stage of the relationship. So being older can have its benefits, but it's also got its disadvantages. I think it's finding that middle ground where you've experienced a bit of life, you've worked a little bit, and then you're ready to enter into a relationship. Today, people get married. Well, they're not marrying so young per se now, because you can see that the age is actually, it's getting a bit, people are getting a bit older. They're wanting to do more with their life before they settle down. But there's always a danger when you've become so independent that how are you going to then take into account somebody else and take on board everything that comes with this person? So I would say be sensible. Don't jump into it too quickly, but at the same time, make sure you've had some life experiences behind you, because that makes all the difference to a good relationship.
Right. Thank you. Another question I have here, it came privately to me. I'm not sure I understand it. Let's see. Advice to get one half to listen if spouse won't. How do you get one to listen? How do you get one to
listen?
Advice to get one half to listen if spouse won't. How do you get? I'm not sure the question. Maybe answer any more than me.
Okay, so let's just say let's make a scenario where we've got somebody that really wants to communicate with their partner, but their partner isn't interested or isn't very good at listening. Right. Now, we're talking about a relationship where you've chosen to be with each other, and that means you're meant to be there for the other when they need you. So by not wanting to listen to your partner, is actually conveying a message that I don't really care about you. Is that the message that the person that doesn't want to listen wants to convey? We have to always think about, what message are we giving off? And sometimes we need to actually say, I don't feel cared for when you ignore me, or when you choose not to enter into a dialogue with me. Because saying I don't feel cared for is very different to saying, you don't listen to me, you never listen to me. Why is it that every time I speak to you, you don't listen? That's a good cue for someone to switch off immediately. So we need to be very careful how we encourage a person to want to listen. We have to say something that draws them in.
Right, that's really good advice. Thank you. And I think we've got time for a couple more questions. Is that okay?
Yes, it's fine.
So someone in the private chat, someone's asked, what options are there if a person's in a toxic or unhelpful atmosphere?
Okay, so when you find yourself in an atmosphere that's really uncomfortable, it's very important to remove yourself from that particular environment until things cool down. Now, we could be talking, are we talking a toxic relationship that we know it's toxic, or are we talking about where there's a danger to somebody in the relationship? Because they're two very different things. where there's danger, obviously, you need to make sure that you try to stay away and keep things as calm as you can. And maybe it's very difficult because there's so many scenarios here, because sometimes a person can be very sweet and smiley and very careful what they say. It doesn't alter the behavior of the other. So when we say a toxic relationship, I think we need to sort of narrow that down. Are we talking about a relationship where we don't think it's working, it's good for us? Is that what could we have a bit of an elaboration here from whoever posed the question?
I think they did it privately, so I'm not sure they'll be able to.
Okay, so we have to, I suppose, what is a toxic relationship? A toxic relationship is one where it's destructive. So let's just say if one half is got an alcohol problem and the other half recognizes this but can't reach the other one because they can't reason with them, or they can't sit down, it might be good to recommend a third party get involved. So you might want to say to that person, look, I think there's a problem in our relationship. It's not you have a problem. There's a problem that we have. You have to own it together. It's not one party only. There are two people in the relationship. Therefore, whatever problem, whether it be gambling, drinking, drug taking, whatever it is, it's our problem. And if you can look at it in that way and talk about it in that way, we have a problem, then that will help people to maybe get some sort of calmness there where they can actually engage.
Right. So it's about sharing the problem rather than
yes,
it's one or
yes.
the other.
It's really important. Whenever there is a problem, it's important to look at it as our problem.
Right. Really
not just one or the other.
No. We just see how important language is within a relationship, instead of communicating those things that sort of desensitize them and make them accessible for people to actually to deal with. That's good. I think we've time for one more question. I think it's probably a really important question here. How do people contact you? And I think I'll ask that as what resources are there out there for people in order to be able to implement all the things you've shared with us this evening?
Right, so I'm giving you my thoughts, okay? If people want something more tangible, something that we can produce a booklet. We haven't done that. And maybe it's a good idea that we produce a booklet, because that way people can use it as a point of reference. We have a website, JMC has a website. If anybody wants to make contact with us and say, look, I might not want to come for counselling, but I'd like some tips, we're more than happy to talk to anybody. It doesn't have to be in a counselling situation. We have an office, and although we're not in the office at the moment, the phone line is manned, so you can leave a phone message, you can leave an email. We have 2 email addresses that people can email. Everything is on our website. I'm just trying to think what else would be helpful to people. Maybe if there is a demand, we might be able to do a workshop and have a half-day workshop where people can actually come along and learn some tools, learn ways of communicating. We're open to whatever helps anybody that requires our services.
Right. Well, that's great. Thank you so much, Tova. We really appreciate your taking the time to speak to us this evening. You've shared with us not only your expertise and your experience, but also some really great practical advice and tips as well. And we want to wish you well. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Keep your family well, and thank you for all the work you do for the JMC and in the wider community as well. And thank you again. Keep well, stay safe, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you to everybody that joined us. Thank you.
Thank you.